everybody, wait a minute. They say when you wear Black Power Media gear, you can accomplish anything. You play any and every position. Coaching, to kicking, to receiving, to running and juking. And, oh my goodness, I see that again in slow motion. Get off me. And you're going to have a lot of haters coming at you, but what you got to do is you got to shake them off, and get to your goal and accomplish it. And when that's done, it's a beautiful thing. I'm talking about going hard, extra, for that extra point. And when it's done beautifully, you talking about touchdown. Oh, and the crowd goes wild and they're celebrating with you and everything. Man, let's see that again. Nice.
Black Power Media, baby. That's how we do it.
Now go to blackpowermedia.org and get you some of that gear. Empower yourself today. Yeah.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here, Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Very happy to be your host. Very excited for today's show. We're going to get right to it in just a quick second. Just a reminder to check out everything on the platform. Make sure you catch up with everything that you've missed, from Sundays to Warrior Class to my show from last week to the remix to Riot Starter, all the good stuff happening on the platform. Please make sure you are supporting it, sharing it, and doing all of that good stuff as we continue to grow as a platform, and support in any of the ways that you can. All the content coming out, please check it out, continue to comment, and we definitely going to have another answering critics session, I see too, so keep them coming. We'll get to that in short order, but without further ado, I don't want to stand on any more ceremony. We have a very exciting discussion to get to with my guest this morning about a topic I'm fascinated by and wanting to learn much more about. And to do that, we're going to be joined by Dr. Kaysha Corinealdi, who will have to definitely correct me on that when she gets up here in just a second, who, among other things, is described or self-described as a historian, scholar of empire and diaspora, feminist, sci-fi enthusiast, and Orgullosamente de Colón. And I know that means proud to be from Cologne. Orgullosamente de Colón, and is author of this great new book that I can't wait to talk more about, Panama in Black, and she joins us now here on the platform. Good morning. Please, first of all, correct me on the pronunciation of your name, and then let's get to it.
That's all right. So that's Kaysha Corinealdi.
Okay, Kaysha
Corinealdi.
I did the best I could.
You did.
So first of all, belated congratulations on the work. And personally, selfishly, thank you for the work. As someone who is happily married into a Panamanian family, and who is very interested in diaspora and race and empire myself, I'm very excited. So I couldn't get to everything in the book. So we'll obviously have to have you back as I continue to finish it. But I have a bunch I want to ask you about, starting with, of course, inviting you to give, from your perspective, an overview and an introduction to the work and what you were trying to accomplish with it.
Certainly. So the book I really see as an opportunity to connect generational histories that often I encountered weren't discussed together. So, for example, what happened after the canal was built? What happened to those that had made that migration to Panama? And then what did I make of the fact that there were also so many Black Panamanians in the United States, in particular in Brooklyn? And to really tell that story, I had to trace the lineage of kind of the descendants of those canal builders, the lives that they made in Panama, and also the complications, the challenges that they faced when having to deal with US empire, with nationalism that was at times often exclusionist in the context of Panama and in the United States, telling that story while nonetheless centering the people, the lives at the core of it. So one of the things that I wanted the book to do, and I hope readers get from the outset, is that this isn't so much that kind of old school story of this is what nations are saying and doing with one another, and the people are not involved. This is really geared from how the people envision the world, even as these various factors connecting migration policies, citizenship policies, et cetera, were being attached along the way. So it's really a history of people navigating migration, empire, diaspora, while living and loving and being in various spaces.
Right on. You know, again, before we get to the specifics, I'm always fascinated because for particularly for those of us who grew up in the United States, for those of us of a certain age, Panama doesn't really factor too much in to the popular discussions of Latin America or diaspora or anything. And particularly for those of us in the United States, I mean, we often don't know much about anything outside the United States to the extent we know much about the United States. But but if we do hear about Panama, or if we did hear about Panama, it was often associated with drugs and Noriega, the invasion, or the more recent invasion, I should say, you know, for, you know, in our generation, you know, what was that, 89?
89, yeah, 89.
And, you know, maybe a reference to the canal or something like that. So could you, to what extent, well, I mean, maybe it's already been made obvious, but to what extent is your work a response to that, even indirectly? You know, or maybe what have you confronted in doing your work in terms of what people think they understand or have heard about Panama? Or maybe baseball fans will say, you know, what is it, Rivera for the Yankees, or, you know, or we'll talk about Noriega, the rapper, or something like that. Like we'll you know, but anyway, how have
I get you. I definitely,
popular, you know,
understandings of it. So certainly, I think when people do encounter Panama, depending on where they are in the country, there is a greater awareness of a history that goes beyond Noriega and that goes beyond the canal, or even a kind of history of drugs. And that in those spaces, and what I've seen is that there has been a hunger to understand the broader connection that Panama has always had to the Black diaspora, to questions of belonging, and also to fights for rights, anti-imperialist discourse. So there's this way in which, because there has been so much attention placed in the news or in other outlets, even the way it's studied, in just thinking about the geopolitical space, or like what's happening and what's going wrong or what needs to be changed, that thinking about some of the cultural, intellectual, political work that in particular Black Panamanians have been engaged in has not been as heavily discussed. I mean, I must say that there have been studies on reggaeton with its origins in Panama, for example, as something that people are likely a bit more familiar with. And so my book is actually looking at that generation that comes before the reggaeton artists, right? They're the ones that are doing calypso, right? They're the ones that are kind of doing this really fascinating blend that you only really hear in Panama, right? Like Spanish calypso, and you're like, okay, there are all these things going on. And so by wanting to really help explain how you get to reggaeton, the book is really outlining, you need to know about the histories of people from the English-speaking and French-speaking Caribbean making their way to Panama, what it was like to be in Panama, including in, at that time, the US-controlled Canal Zone, and what it then meant to come forth and be also in New York City at a time where you also have the rise of hip-hop and other sort of cultural influences. So it really, the way that I saw it, I wanted for future writers of Panama or people interested in the subject to sort of say, I don't have to give you the backstory anymore, right? Like it's being given to you as to why there is this rich Black diaspora. And now let me just get to details, you know, whether it is talking a bit more about reggaeton, whether it is talking a bit more about feminist work, talking a bit more about hemispheric, you know, civil rights. Now that work has been done. So let me get to that next specific work.
Right on. So I gotta say, I can't help it. You'll have to.
Mhm.
I hope you'll forgive me. But the only
Okay.
thing that I had a problem with in reading your book so far is
Mhm.
that I've had to struggle with to overcome. But I'm gonna give you I want to give you the Black Panamanian pass on this. Is the shout out to Henry Louis Gates in the acknowledgments. Like
Okay.
that's a struggle over here for me. I was like, oh, but that aside, I
I
again,
understand.
I had to put that
Mhm.
out. I was like, so because if anybody picks up the book after hearing this interview, I'm sure they might
Mhm.
they might be like, Jared. No, but
I
anyway,
hear you. I
no.
hear you.
So
No, no,
I don't mean to
no.
put you on the spot. You don't need to say anything. I just can't help it. I was like, I read it. I was like, oh.
Well, for me, I wanted to acknowledge being able to get time to write the book. I mean, one of the things that is really hard about academia is just finding time to write. And
Yeah.
for that, I wanted to shout out the people who had helped in that process and not taking away all of the things that they themselves have to, account for in terms of explaining further. But that was just me. It's hard for me to not say thanks when a help has been given. But I
Right
appreciate
on.
your asking about it, and it's out
I
there.
just I left it. I even have a question mark in my notes, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. I can't help it. So, but the other, but I do want to ask. So like, I like in your bio the reference to your interest in empire, and I have my own version of this as as we all would as I apply it to Panama. But I'm interested in how you see empire impacting Panama, maybe from its origin to today, or what role does empire play in your approach to this book, even, or to the particular study that you've engaged here?
Yeah, so when talking about Panama, you can't not talk about empire, and particularly U.S. empire, but certainly the British Empire and U.S. empire in the sense that you have a vested interest in building this canal by any means necessary, and the use of a separatist movement that was happening in Panama anyway to sort of have a treaty mapped out that was a deeply unequal treaty that anyone in contemporary looking at it would not have signed that because it was so clearly unequal. And then on the other hand, and this especially factors into the people that I write about, many being born in Jamaica, Barbados, other British colonies at the time, were also placed in this interesting position where once the Panamanian state decided that their children were not going to be given access to Panamanian citizenship, they had no citizenship to provide to their own children, right? So there's this sense that empire is very messy. It is something that really challenges people's ability to fully make home in any one place, because it is these bigger empires, the US, the British, that are trying to define the terms of who gets to live in a space, be in a space, and ultimately trying to navigate that and make the best out of those circumstances is what the book is about. But really a lot of my scholarship has been about that question of, you have these bigger systems of power and control, and what do you do when it comes to trying to navigate your own life, your own sense of belonging?
Right on. So okay, so now let's get to at least the parts of the book that I got to, and then obviously whatever I don't invite you to talk about, please just bring us to, if there's some particular points or parts that you want us to talk about. But just from the beginning of the book, for me in many ways was a mind blow, and I want to forgive me for not having it better ordered, but there's a part in your book where you talk about the origin of the word chombo, and for my adopted, married into family, my in-laws, that like it has a personal, it references people or a person in particular in our family. But the history of that word was, I don't think, really outlined or conveyed to me in the way that you talk about it. So maybe with that as an entry point, could you talk about where that term originates and how? Yeah, let's just start. Let's just leave it there. How does that term originate? Yeah.
Definitely. So from my looking into some of the newspaper accounts and just writings of just by the mid 19th century, at the time Panama was still part of Colombia, there is this attempt at creating a narrative that differentiates Black people born in what is at that point Colombia and Panama, and those born especially in the English speaking Caribbean. And this particular term is presented as one that from very early on and to this present, it is an insult. And there has been attempts at trying to reclaim it in the way that pejorative terms have been throughout the diaspora. But what you do see is that this particular term was intended to create this sense of a perpetual foreignness that was anti-Black in every way. And it was a term that was only used to describe Black people not born in Panama who happened to be of Caribbean ancestry, and it was never applied to white, let's say, US citizens who were born in Panama or the descendants. And it was intended very much to create this perpetual Black foreigner that the nation, in this case, the Panamanian state, would always present as these are outliers to true Panamanians.
Yeah, I mean, so I just pulled up the section where I mean, this part where you talked about it here, and you said by the 1880s, a large number of Afro-Caribbeans were recruited for the French canal building effort. Commentary about Panama becoming a, quote, new Jamaica, and epithets like chombo, undesirable Black foreigner, appeared in the Isthmian dailies. Again, I was like, wow, because anyway, so is even going back to my initial question about empire, I sort of simplify the history, Colombia is itself a creation of Spanish empire originally. Right. And then eventually, as the United States and France and others start to see the value, the potential value, not only of many things, but of that canal zone area, they get involved. The United States more or less imposes itself and says by 1903, this is now Panama, and with that is U.S. heavily being involved in that. And within that, there are this importation of all these Africans from all over the diaspora who are Jamaica, as you talk about, who then start to comprise and start to change the landscape of the demographic. And then here comes all that, as you talk about this Spanish targeting or aspiring colonial interest that then starts to say, well, we want to have Panamanians defined by this mythic idea of indigenous and Spanish people, no Black people involved. And then out of that comes this idea that if chombo means that you're Black and that you're not really wanted in this new Panama. Please. So for instance, I'll ask you to talk, to say more about what I just outlined there in terms of just in terms of this figure, Mendoza, that you write about at the beginning of the book. Could you talk about him and how he and his movement factor into that summary of the history I just outlined?
So remind me, are you talking about, oh no, that's okay, because I wanted to make sure I had the name right in terms of, are you talking about Carlos Mendoza, the eventual president, or are you talking about the writer of that piece that is El Peligro Antillano?
Yeah, that I'm talking about the leader, Oh man, now you put me on the spot. I'm not ready. The leader that you talk about early on in the book, who was involved in, so he was targeted by the U.S. because he was not supporting the U.S. dominance of what was going to become Panama.
So that is Carlos Mendoza,
and
absolutely.
Okay, right.
I know
his version of Black leadership gets interrupted, and so yeah, sorry, Carlos Mendoza.
That's right. No, that's all right. No, I wanted to make sure that I was addressing, because two very different people.
Right.
But yes, going back to your question about empire and the fact that, yes, the Spanish Empire can't be immediately factored out of this, and that Colombia emerges out of an anti-colonial, anti-Spain movement. Yet, what I trace in the book, and it has been traced by others, but I try to map out how it connects explicitly to what happens in the part of the U.S. In terms of envisioning what Panama could be, is that there is this sense of wanting to reproduce Spanish Iberia in the Americas, and in particular in Panama, in such a way that it negates the fact that, like, Panama's never going to be Spain, right? It's never going to be the Iberian Peninsula, but many of these intellectuals are nonetheless looking to Spain for that idea. And that if they don't form part of, let's say, that understanding of the world, or they challenge US empire, then their purity as Panamanians becomes questioned. And that's where Carlos Mendoza comes into being, and that an Afro-descendant, right, the first Afro-descendant who ends up being president through kind of, the first president is kind of out of commission, then the first vice president isn't. And so finally it is up to him to now hold this position, but with the fact that he had been in disagreement with some of the terms that were being presented by the US that would have to be included in the Panamanian Constitution regarding, for example, the US having perpetual right to intervene in Panamanian affairs. In addition to there being this concern that having anyone of Black extraction in a leadership position, when you are trying to actually present your nation as being an equal in terms of whiteness, in this case, an Iberian whiteness, not necessarily one that's looking to Anglo-Saxon whiteness, but certainly trying to share that commonality, someone like him really gets in the way, right? And so we're not even talking about someone that was trying to present anything too radical, et cetera, just basically trying to do what he had been elected to do, which was be president. But suddenly here you see that there is a coalition of white elites in Panama, in the United States, that have this shared understanding that having any person of African descent lead a nation at this juncture is not happening, right? I often say many are still scared of Haiti, right? It never went away. This idea of what happens if you actually have a nation that is led by those who were once enslaved and took over. And so that clamping down on that vision of having Black leadership is so strong that it really animates these particular anti-Black, hyper Spanish-leaning understandings of national identity that the people living it are seeing. But this isn't real, right? This isn't Panama, but it's what those in power want to emphasize.
Yeah, no, and yeah, that so as you were talking about, because again, of course, it's one thing for me to say the U.S. played every role possible in creating Panama, but as you point out, they didn't just draw a line and walk away. They did try to impose their own racial codes, Jim Crow, segregation style, so Mendoza and others who had, even to your point, who weren't necessarily wild revolutionaries, their African, as you said, ancestry was used against them in terms of the U.S. supporting who they chose to support as they tried to reshape, again, this Iberian form of racial hierarchy and exploitation. So that was anyway. I was also fascinated by your discussion of the role of the press that you seem to talk about, at least throughout make reference to the role that these Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Panamanians, the role the press played for them in creating newspapers and outlets. Could you talk a little bit about what that was for them?
Yeah, and I got to say that having been able to read through, and in particular, I focus on the Panama Tribune, which was created by Sidney Young, who was himself born in Jamaica, but really raised in Panama, and then later on taken over by George Westerman, who was born and raised in Panama. And one of the things about looking at this newspaper that I realized was that there was so much there about how people were living their day-to-day lives, to how this was an important vehicle to communicating what was happening, for organizing, for also critiquing one another. I love how they just give shade to each other as well. Like the editorial pages are fantastic. They're like, you might think you're doing us a service, but you aren't. Like, this is the problem with those of you who try to think that you get some education, you can control things. I mean, like, the discourse is fascinating. They're really open.
Like, people talk trash about today, but they would, those people would have been on YouTube and Twitter just as much as everybody else.
They would have, like, you could see it. They were like, no, I don't agree with what you're saying. Like, you might be the editor right now, but you don't know what you're talking about. I lived this. And so what I loved seeing and kind of reading through it was that it wasn't creating this kind of sole one-dimensional understanding of community and belonging. You saw that there were conflicts. You saw that there were people who had different visions, right? So I look at people who, were Pan-Africanists, and then people that were like, but no, I'm Panamanian, right? And others that are like, well, is the Western Hemisphere for us at all, right? So all of these really rich debates that are coming out in newspapers, capitalizing on the fact that, particularly for those that are, the children of many of the migrants, these are some of the most literate people in all of Panama, right? Like, many, their parents have gone above and beyond to make sure that they can read, they can write. And so there is this population that is thirsty to, like, just read more about themselves in the press that isn't just people documenting, well, how are we going to get these people out of our country, blah, blah, blah. Ways that you just wouldn't want to be engaging with that kind of media yet. In these newspapers, you have an opportunity to, as I said, be in conversation and sometimes in conflict and pushing back on one another, but also learning about what other Black people are doing in other parts of the world. So what I say is that in Panama, they were deeply informed about what was happening in New York, about what was happening in Paris, about what was happening in Ghana, because the paper formed part of this international Black press, whereby there was this sense of, rather than thinking of a section within a newspaper that said, well, this is the Black section, mention all the Black stuff here. It was, no, the entire paper is about Black life, is about what's happening internally, but also outside. So how can we do that, right? How can we actually make sure that when people pick this up, they're reading a bit about themselves. They're also reading about, the communities and lives, even in the U.S. controlled canal zone, because I think that's another thing that many people, at least when I've spoken to them, just didn't even comprehend the degree to which there were Black communities in this canal zone, right? It wasn't just U.S. soldiers and the canal itself, but like people had built communities, schools, lives. And so the newspaper also tied in these communities that others wouldn't be able to access because this was a militarized zone. So you have to get permission to enter, all of these things along the way. So the way that it allowed for people to communicate with each other in ways that the borders that were created by the US were kind of upended, but also the way that it allowed people to create across nation state borders, right? How you can learn about what was happening in Cuba, what was happening in the Dominican Republic, what was happening, as I said, right, in Ghana, a really big awareness of your role in the world that was a lot bigger than many of these discourses of do you belong or don't you belong attempted to present.
And that's part of what you were talking about in their attempt to develop this local internationalism. Is that
that's
part
right.
of how you
that's absolutely
maybe could you say
that's
a little bit more
it.
about that? Yeah.
I will, because what I was trying to think about, how can I explain this, right? We're talking about people who especially by the time you get to the 40s, are being denied, access to identity cards, being denied access to passports. So like mobility is not necessarily going to be possible in terms of leaving, but they have always taught in these international ways. So local in the sense that they've always had to navigate the ins and outs of finding jobs, of educating themselves, their families, of, just finding and sharing information about how to be safe, about how to safeguard against what's happening, while also being aware that what was happening in Panama, while distinctive due to the specificities of the history of the isthmus, was also having parallels in other parts of the world. So in what ways do you have to think strategically about what you need to do to get by, to make sure that you can, have housing, have shelter, have home, have identity cards, etc., but also know that you're not alone, and that by remaining in that conversation with others who are going through it or have gone through it, you also can learn to strategize about ways that you can challenge just moving forward. So that ability to simultaneously be doing that work, which I think has a lot to do with being, right, the descendants of migrants who already had to do that who themselves, right, were kind of descendants of people enslaved and had to constantly be innovating, be imagining what was possible, also factored into, you've got to think of where you are presently, but be mindful of what you'll need moving forward.
So, aside from some of the specifics of your book and so much of it that I still have to get to, the one of the questions that kept coming up for me as I was reading it, and as I knew would come up, as I was hoping would come up for me, is how do you think your book addresses what I perceive humbly as an outsider to Panama, as a resistance to overt discussions of race, even within families? As I'm reading this history, even again with the word chombo, the context of it, and given its use as a name for a particularly darker skin in-law, is like, I feel like we need some conversations to take place. And then even my in-laws here who have, and again, I'm starting selfishly with my family, admittedly, obviously it's bigger than that, but but even my in-laws here, many of whom are their partners are either Black American or parts of the other parts of the African diaspora. They're in particularly Black and diasporan communities even here. I'm just wondering what you think your book is saying, or if you've noticed any response to your work, given what I again perceive as maybe this, not some direct conversation happening, not enough direct conversation happening.
Well, I mean, I think what you'll find is that talking explicitly about race is something that people say doesn't happen, but happens all of the time. By the nicknames, certainly people give each other, by the way that people, might want to say, well, don't say negra, say morena, right? Like say things that are going to be a bit milder. So like, we know these things are happening, but there's been a long history of attempting to say, well, race just isn't an issue from kind of the top down. And so what you have is, in the context of Panama, census stopped collecting race data after 1940, so that there's no race being tabulated as a way of saying, well, we're all, just a mixture, right? We're visor de razas. What that does is that it doesn't actually address the discriminations that were taking place that in particular always affected indigenous and Afro-descendant populations, so that you do see disparate levels of employment, of education, of housing, et cetera. So it kind of allowed for all those things to be placed as well. It's just a matter of like class, right? And you just have to work a bit harder, and this way you can move forward. But what you do see, especially in what I try to trace in the book, is that this really embedded history of pointing in particular to Black people and Black people who in any way you're suggesting are foreigners in one way or another as a problem is also symptomatic of a longer narrative of wanting to aspire to a certain kind of national vision that was increasingly whitened, right, generation after generation, but was never explicitly stated as such. And so what I especially also wanted to get across in the book is that what you see also happen is an attempt at dividing Black people, right, in Panama by also introducing, pejorative terms, by suggesting that there were always going to be Black foreigners, in that rather than having Black people in dialogue together and conscientious of how these discriminatory behaviors were going to ultimately affect everybody, and that you're not going to be stopped in the street and asked to provide your ancestral lineage, right? People were going to be treating you the way that they assumed they were going to be treating any kind of other or foreigner. And what does it say when from the outset you've already decided this is the epitome of who an other is, that darker skinned person that you just assume doesn't belong? When the majority of, especially when you're looking at places like Panama City, Colón, Casa del Toro, that is, right, the majority of population. So you're essentially saying that all the people here are essentially foreigners and never truly Panamanian. And so creating a vision of the nation that is just a lie, but one that is sold and taught in school in such a way that you're not going to really get at these in-depth discussions that are so needed. Because one of the things that, in writing this, there's a sense of, well, how much are you critiquing, let's say, the nation, and is it fair to, say these things about people in the past, maybe that this is how everybody was, et cetera. And I always try to say, well, let's not assume that everybody was okay with this, because we actually, I found newspaper accounts, I found people who were fighting this, who are always saying this is not okay. Like, why are you suggesting that we're different, that our difference, that's actually something that is something that should create animosity and hostility, as opposed to a source of pride and a generative power. And so that conversation about this is not just something that emerges now or a recent phenomenon. It has a longer root in wanting to differentiate the Panamanian nation from, the U.S., from Jamaica, et cetera, but forgetting the very people who are so fundamental to making the nation what it is, that these discussions emerge. And so, yeah, those family conversations are always so fascinating, because even in putting some things together, some members of my own family were like, what? The Constitution said what? Right? Because why would that have been a subject taught extensively in school, right? Why would, it's a very shameful chapter. But I always say it's important to be able to be open and frank about these things, because they don't go away. And similarly, for anyone, who is thinking, well, the U.S., they helped build the canal, et cetera, and they don't know about the extent that Jim Crow was actually implemented and executed in the U.S., should also be a moment to reflect, like, well, what does it mean for me, as a citizen, to form part of an empire that decided that it was going to do this, right, in my name, right, in the name of sort of being the ultimate power in the hemisphere, later globally. So I am hoping that it does engender a lot of questions about, what do I make of this history that has otherwise not been discussed so openly? And does this make me reflect a bit on the kinds of decisions that I have made about allegiances, about commitments, about what I view as what's possible moving forward?
I mean, even I mean, it's I don't know. It's weird to be when I was reading your book, and I'm saying, on one hand, I get intellectually that this or that has occurred, but it's still a little, surreal to actually read it. So when you're talking about the intent to construct the new mixture of what a Panamanian really is, to exclude African so that it's
Mm-hmm.
strictly, and as you talk about, it's not even just that they're saying we're only Spanish and indigenous, but it's like these myths of what those two groups are meant to mean. And it's almost as if it's to say, and you say it's anti-Black in a sense that it's the myth of building those up is to pull the identity away from the African, even as all these Black people are there and all these people have all this melanin.
Oh yeah, it's like impossible. It's impossible. You're like, what are you doing? You know, there's no way.
I have to, you know, I was even shocked.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry, I have to plug in my laptop. I'm losing power for my cam,
yeah, no,
so I'll
please,
just
go
be
ahead.
right back.
No problem. Again, I think a lot of the folks who are in our chat routinely will be aware of this, but when I was shocked the first time I set foot in Panama.
Yeah.
And started walking around, and you're walking around, and I was like, this like we were joking about when my brother-in-law was on here, who's also a rapper who took the name Baiano in tribute to the Maroon history, you know, but I was like, it is Black as hell. Like this country is, I mean, it is, you know, all the stereotypes of what you think a Latin American country is not that.
You're not the first person to say that. That's like, what in the world? Like, how can they try to say that this is an Iberian? What was happening? But it was precisely because, you know, and most people like, you know, spend some time clearly in Panama City. And it was seeing Panama City that aggravated so many of these people who saw themselves as having to protect Panama, and why they're like, well, you've got to go farther into the country, right? Farther in. And I'm like, farther in, you also still see Black people. But, you know, there was still this myth of like, it's just not, we've got to get people to not think of it as a Black nation, because, you know, we aren't. But you're like, why not? What is causing this desire to be perceived as not Black? And I think there is where you see a connection that, you know, Panama has with other nations in Central America, in South America, in North America, right? In the Americas as a whole, where there is a deep reluctance to imagine a sense of nation, a sense of belonging that begins and suggests this notion that Black people are intellectual leaders, are political leaders, are leaders of the nation writ large, just deep, deep resistance. So even when you start having, well, okay, fine, culturally, let's see that these particular instruments and these particular foods, et cetera, are part of it, there is still a deep resistance to thinking about the other forms of knowledge and the other kinds of political, educational, social potentials that Black people have that is shared throughout. And that for me, that I've been in conversation with people, you know, working on other countries, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, US, and we do return to that, right? Like, what do you make of, even when there is a fine, you know, we'll give you that culturally, right? You might have some of this, the food, et cetera. There's still this resistance of other forms of knowledge, other political experiences that aren't defined by that elite that still maintains so much power from the beginning of the 20th century to now.
So I've been, so I got chastised last week for pulling up comments during the show, which was seen as being distracting to guests and people in the chat. So I haven't been doing it today out of respect to the critique and to you, but I've been trying to collect some. So if folks have comments or questions that they want us to try to address, please continue to share them or reshare them. But to that end, I did want to get a time check with you just to see how you were with time, because there's at least two more topic areas I wanted to raise with you before we got to any of the comments or questions. But so yeah, how are you with
I'm
time?
good with time. Yeah, I'm good
Okay,
with time. So we can do your, those two topics and then
okay,
see
right on.
what questions emerge. Yeah.
Okay, right on, right on. Actually, it's three. I'm gonna fold.
Okay.
Sorry about that. It's three.
Okay.
I'm gonna fold two of them together because you mentioned Garvey at one point, and then you use Marcus Garvey, and then you use the phrase diasporic or diaspora world making a couple of times. So I'd like if I could just collapse those two into one topic area. Garvey's how does Garvey's, I mean, he's not a major focus, I don't think, but how is his intervention or passage through in your book and literally through Panama? How does that factor into your work? And then what is this diaspora world making that you talk about in terms of Afro-Caribbeans in Panama?
Yeah, so starting with Garvey, one of the things that was really fascinating and looking at some of the earlier pre-1920s, especially 19 teens to 1928, 30, a lot of UNIA chapters in Panama, I think the second after Cuba in terms of outside of the United States. And this was not surprising given the number of people from Jamaica, from Barbados, from islands at one point colonized by the British, that there would be this great interest in something like the UNIA, like the Garvey movement, like Pan-Africanism. What I encounter in the book is that by the time you get to the late 20s, early 30s, you also have these ongoing debates about, what are the uses of Garveyism as a discourse, especially as Garvey's getting into more trouble in terms.
Uh-oh. Am I the only one seeing her as frozen? Uh-oh. Let me give Professor Corinealdi a chance to regroup. Okay, looks like we got you back. Okay, a little hiccup there. And sometimes I'm not sure if when a freeze happens, I'm not sure if it's just me seeing it or if it, okay. But I think we got you back.
Everywhere. It happens. I think we've gotten used to. We know that at some point or another, you're gonna get into some, internet.
Well, I refuse to accept it. I refuse to accept it. We're doing big work here, and we pay StreamYard too much money. So StreamYard needs to get their stuff together. That's what I'm not accepting that. Anyway.
All right, I get that. But yeah, just to say that many of those, writing into the newspaper, engaging in these works, either themselves were members of the UNIA or had parents who had been strong members. So, for example, one of the largest labor union strikes that happens in 1920 in Panama, at least one or two of the organizers are also connected with UNIA chapters in Colón, one of the biggest cities on the Atlantic side. And so there is this shared understanding of Black life collectively coming together that isn't just united by empire, but instead united by the potential of what Black people could do together, could build together. So this idea of entrepreneurship, of innovation, is something that is very much drawn from the discussions that were happening surrounding being united as Black people in the world. That is in turn partly connected to what I discussed as diasporic world making, in that being part of these diasporas, the way that Panama becomes an important site for people who would otherwise not been in contact with one another, right? From all these different places in the Caribbean and other parts of Central America. And that produces a new kind of understanding of what it means to be of the Caribbean or of African ancestry in the context of a kind of multilingual, multi-nation state, multi-citizenship focused understanding that requires being able to, negotiate and discuss with people, as I said, who you would otherwise not have been in conversations with, and to strategize on similar ways that you are facing discrimination, that you are facing exclusion, and that you are also engaging in this work of education, of belonging. And so I see it play out in the way that teachers, for example, talk about their students being citizens of the world at a time that they don't have citizenship, right, or are being denied that citizenship. So it really asks for an imagining that is both at times the ability to move, but also takes into account when you're not able to move, what it means to understand that you're coming, there's a diversity of experiences among Black people, right? There isn't this unison way of being, and that diversity, that ability to engage in rich and necessary debate can also lead to more promising understandings of collaborations and exchanges. And so I talk about it in the form of, labor union organizing, but also in the form of civic associations, and the idea of people reflecting on what the nation state should do for you, even when you're no longer there, things of that nature.
Right on. Thank you. All right. So the bigger topic of the two remaining that I wanted to get to, you have a chapter or a whole section on Panama in New York. So I did want to invite you to talk a little bit about just that, Panama in New York. Obviously Harlem has been seen as a Pan-African, mecca of sorts for the African world. You talked about Brooklyn. We just did a couple weeks ago, covered the Panamanian Festival in Brooklyn, and where my brother-in-law was performing, and talked a little bit about its history and its very Afro-Panamanian origins. So anyway, when you talk about Panama and New York, what is it that you get into?
So I get into Brooklyn. So what Harlem, as I mentioned, is something that you especially start to see Panamanians who are making their way in the late 19-teens, 1920s, make their way to places like Harlem. But by the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it's Brooklyn. And it is in Brooklyn where they are, renting. They're also, when they can, purchasing homes. And these become spaces where people organize. And so I talk in particular about one organization that's created by Black women from Panama who are thinking about that next generation being educated, knowing that they're going to face particular challenges, being Black and being immigrants, but also this deep understanding that they are going from segregation and discrimination that played out in different ways in Panama, that plays out in new ways in the United States. And as a result, they really have the ability to be these kind of bridge builders in a way that other groups can't, because they very much understand US politics in ways that many other people migrating to the US just don't. They experience that in daily level. They also have the multilingual skills. And interestingly enough, for me, I find that it is in New York that they also, in Brooklyn in particular, to upend this very Iberian narrative that I talk about being disputed from the outset of the book, beginning with the newspapers, that sort of ending in New York. And I end there because I want to suggest that when we see the opportunity to once more remake and redisplay what Panama should mean to the world, you have Black women leading the way, and you also have a sense that Brooklyn and all of its rich sort of Black history coming together, so that you have women, these women talking with Shirley Chisholm, right? They're talking with other people who have these rich Black diasporic experiences, and really creating the backdrop to what would later be even being able to have something like a Panamanian Day Parade, right? If you didn't already have that base of people that created, Franklin Ave as this major throughway, in Brooklyn is where you sort of would know that you could find other Panamanians, other discourses that you would also be in discussion. It is also in Brooklyn that you have Panamanians forcing the Panamanian state to think about extending voting rights to those who are not in Panama anymore. So it really becomes this interesting and powerful hub for imagining an even more expanded vision of Panama that is very much Black-centered and proudly so, where there isn't anyone apologizing or kind of explaining, oh, this is the culture and then this is the side of it. It is instead presenting, indeed, Panama in Black in every way.
Right on, right on. All right, so one more from me, and then we'll get to the the remixers, the audience comments and chats. You talk a little bit about Omar Torrijos, whose history is of a particular interest of mine. You know, studying some of the leftist politics and what he was seen as trying to do, and of course his death, and you know, various perspectives on that plane crash. But I was very interested in how he figures in your work and his relationship to these efforts of Afro-Panamanians and others to be seen and heard, et cetera, and so forth. Does my limited understanding of his relative radicalism extend to these efforts as well? Or was he not consistent or inconsistent or not consistent enough?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things with Torrijos is that he certainly was someone that was trying to offer and extend education and political power to people who hadn't previously, right? So to members of the indigenous communities and certainly to Afro-Panamanians. And so you do see, you know, for example, you know, members of what would go on to be his kind of attempts at having political leadership under a military dictatorship, because he entered as a military dictatorship that nonetheless tried to create spaces for political inclusion, certainly tried to back up groups that had already emerged, created by Afro-Panamanians who were already identifying as such and formed part of a larger 60s movement of trying to ensure that Black rights form part of any national or international agenda. And so Torrijos actually happens to come about at a moment that was already happening, and realizing that it was strategic to continue to have some of these conversations with these groups. And in the context of the canal and the treaties that emerged, also realizing that it was Black Panamanians who actually had the most knowledge about what working on the canal had been like, about what Jim Crow conditions, even though there were no longer, you know, the idea was to have ended those by the 50s and 60s, the idea that there were still inequalities in terms of employment, that it was Black Panamanians who had this information, who in fact educated members of the US public about what was happening, that made his interest in that population really important. At the same time, and if I try to narrate a little bit in the book, because I don't go into the 70s as much, is that there were members of the diaspora that were, especially Black Panamanians, who were in disagreement with him, who did not agree with how he cracked down on the press, who themselves were exiled, and as a result were very cautious about some of their exchanges, even as they saw that he was utilizing a language, a discourse of inclusion. There was always the suspicion of, you know, then why can't we return to a full democratic order? So like that balance was a really tough one, because depending on who you ask, the generation, there is a deep respect for being able to be the first in their family to go to college. You know, that was certainly the case, you know, with my mom, the sense of it was because I finally was able to get these kinds of economic opportunities for those who didn't live in the city but had to travel to go to the major university. So there is that sense of debt and respect that I hear from that generation, with kind of generations of today being also mindful of, well, what does it mean to also recognize that this was dictatorship, right? So that's always a tough question, right? Like, how much can you do while also acknowledging that politically it was limited to what military leaders wanted and viewed as the most important thing.
Right on. All right. So listen, before we get to some of the questions from our, as I like to describe them, relatively small but thoughtful audience, I personally need to stretch. I can't front. So what I would like to do, with your permission, is we're going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to give you the screen. I'll be in the background to pull up the questions, but I'm going to give you the screen so that you can address the questions, and so that nobody has to, bear witness to this gross display of me stretching. But so let's do that here. And folks, if you have already and I missed them, please put your comments and questions or your questions back in, repost them, and if I didn't get them lined up, and we'll get to them as many as the professor can. So don't go anywhere. Much more coming up here at I Mix What I Like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right. Well, that's true. The power of what you're told through colonized education or state-run media, Ricky, absolutely. I think that what my hope is that there is more engagement publicly that is happening by historians, by scholars who are recognizing that people want to learn more, right? Want to use things like Twitter, like Facebook, like these streaming platforms to get more educated about what's going on, to not simply be told this narrative that just isn't very clear, and that sometimes is in fact reinforcing negative stereotypes. So if in any way my book is able to get people to think in other ways about how Black people have been active in their own agendas, about what they get to do as thinkers, as educators, as cultural producers, then I feel like I've won, right? This major battle of not having people just sort of say, well, I just don't know, what I can trust, etc. Know that those of us who have that personal commitment to making sure that we are being thorough and just really diving into all aspects of this history, that it's real, and that we want for greater engagement. It's just a matter of finding the platforms and finding the ways of doing it.
So I was trying to be that disembodied voice a moment ago to bring up the question. I wasn't doing it right, but Lee is asking a question here that I've not found an answer to myself, even asking family. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So, I mean, it's definitely, even in the, for those chronicling and going a bit more into colonial Panamanian history, there is debate in terms of the degree to which the term has to do with fishing and the quantity of fish that were available, and that this was connected to an indigenous term that was utilized that was later kind of has been remapped and re-understood and reframed in different ways. So there is something connected to that. And I'm blanking on the indigenous language at play in sort of Panama itself, but it is rooted in that idea of fish, of the sea, etc.
Right on. Thank you very much. And thank you, Leah, for that as well. Let's see. We know Black labor was brought from the diaspora to build the railroad canal. Are there records of liberated, recaptured Africans who worked on the railroad canal? Evidence is scant. I'm not, do you understand?
Well,
Yeah, hopefully you understand that.
I'm trying to think about in the context of within Panama prior to Black people from the Anglophone Caribbean coming to Panama, there was already a large population of people who had either from part of maroon runaway communities or freed communities of Black people. And if the question is about whether you had those particular Black Panamanians also hired to build railroads, et cetera, what my information evidence is that starts to happen more so in the 40s, 50s, and beyond, that you originally had a focused attention on hiring those who spoke and understood English because it was being constructed by the US. Prior to that, with the French effort, you also had some people recruited from Martinique to do that construction. And then for the railroad, that was also kind of focusing on English-speaking migrants. So that, in terms of who was being recruited, often also had to do with who was controlling the constructions themselves, whether it's the US with the railroad and private companies involved, the French, and then later on the actual US government that created a canal corporation to do all that.
Right on, right on. Thank you very much. Just a couple of comments that I caught. Yeah, it goes beyond Roberto Duran, and all due respect to the hands of stone. I was very much in my Black American bias bag when he was fighting Sugar Ray. I always have to. I have to always be. I have to admit. Yeah. Emma, I do like open-ended questions. I like to hear people go off and think. So I hope that isn't too much of a disturbance. Let's see, Ricky, again, that canal was way out of the region for countless Caribbeans. Men would send money home, and that money would be used to send siblings to the U.S. for England. Absolutely.
That's right, Ricky. Yeah. I know you know your history based on that question, just that comment. And absolutely, there was this idea of the Colón men that form part of that idea of the amount of money that particularly those in the construction and then related economies would amass and then send back. And then not everybody sends it back, right? Some, started new families and all that happens. But the number of people who are able to use some of those funds to go on and be educated in the US, to your point, in England, to also expand their education, within Panama, the parts of Central America, is a unique aspect of that Panama money. Another way that it's also been described in Barbados, in Jamaica, kind of the degree that also shaped it. And then another element, another level that I don't quite get as much into in the book has to do with those who then return to the Caribbean, return with this experience, having worked and lived and just created life in other spaces. And the degree to which some of them are also seen as being possible troublemakers because they were organizing, right? In the canal, they were organizing in other ways. And so there's that additional history as well, because by that time, there's also the reminder that the British still hold these colonial still has colonial power in these areas, and it's increasingly becoming untenable to still have empire, and there are all of these decolonial movements happening. So all that intermix of the money, the legacies of living and working in Panama, and the connections that people are making across these spaces, that's really powerful.
Oh no, this is hurting me right here. Because and I don't know if this is spelled because the way I always hear it pronounced is con colon, which is the sort of overcooked dark part of the bottom of the rice pan. That is actually my favorite part. But it has its own disturbing history. Then oh man.
Yeah, and you know,
we gotta talk, family.
Yeah. Some conversations clearly need to be had, because I think that's for me the part that I want people to understand. If you're like, well, I don't think it's racist, but you are being told that it has racist, roots in terms of terminology that is directly othering people. And it is othering people on the basis, right, of their race, of their ethnicity,
oh, so I may be wrong here.
language.
Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to be doing that. But maybe you can clarify this too. Are these two different words, cocolo and concolon?
So concolon is a different word. So cocolo, and the person can let me know if that, because I know I've heard of something similar within the Dominican Republic context, but I don't know if this is what they were speaking on in terms of, in terms of like that. And I believe that is also tracing some of a similar migrant experience there in that context, British migration there. So that's where that term might be drawing from. And I think what I was saying nonetheless still applies in that sometimes we have to question why we as a society have agreed that this term isn't offensive when people are telling you that it is coming from a history of explicit xenophobia and anti-Blackness, right? And so that, if you're using it, and if you are trying to say, well, it is just about the experience, then you are also then negating what has been lived by those who are, by these terms, still being presented as outsiders. And that has deep consequences, right? For anyone being able to feel that they are truly a part of the places where they're born or that they call home. And so that's really what the book is about, and that I hope it can really speak to others who similarly share, recognizing that there's both this love and hate for how people talk about migration, talk about migrants, talk about people moving, right? People love when you are entering to do the labor, when you help build the largest wonder in the world, but then it's like, goodbye. Why, right? Like, why do we do this? And why do we think it's okay? Come and work on our sugar plantations, work on our batés, but then leave. And at the same time, we'll insult you and we'll say that you are the problem. That for me is what I hope we have deeper conversations of. Why are we okay with creating these systems that allow for this rejection of the very people who were then heralding for coming to do the work? So
the canal folks, they've slicked it up. When you go to visit the canal and they have that whole the museum thing, the history display, they do what I see done very to the highest levels and with the greatest success here in this country. They present some of this history, but in a way that you don't start to ask certain questions. You don't maybe make certain connections to today. I mean, so if you pay attention, they'll tell you that there was a tiered system for pay that was race-based. It was based on, you can read about, you can catch that there's a lot of bodies that were accumulated in the development of that canal and all of that. There's a lot there's a lot of suffering went into that. But then to your point, then they can kind of turn it away. It's like they can make it into something that's almost, let's praise them for having suffered, but don't look at their descendants too carefully. Don't look at the conditions of their descendants. We're going to praise them but we're not going to make any connections to what's happening today. So it's very slick. Anyway, so that's why work like yours is very important. And anyway, because a lot of people are going through that canal and not getting it.
No, I know. And it's like, if one person, if I can get at least one person as they're going through it, to ask those questions, to be like, what, to your point, does it mean to navigate through this lock system that involved, thousands of Black people dying, to make it possible, but that also, what does it mean to know that there was always, that there was a value added to what people were worth, right? Silver, gold, that was directly connected to race, to citizenship, and that what you also saw was a united way in which both within the Canal and Canal Coast area and outside of that area, you had a concerted effort to still maintain a very sanitized version of history that didn't take into account the death, the discrimination, and the way that politicians and government officials made this the reality that they hoped it would be for the rest of the country. So passing through that canal, I kind of want people to be mindful that it's a lot more complicated than just look at this wonder. It is also a shared history of a desire to be modern in the world that was built on the back of Black people, and that also requires a kind of silencing of the more problematic histories of how that took place, who was pushed aside, and who was imagined to still represent the nation. So it's, for me, being able and willing to simultaneously be in awe of what's before you, but also know that there are things that you are not being told and that are explicitly being silenced. Then you're a step ahead, right? Because you're not just lulled into the romanticized version of sanitized history.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. So just a couple things here that I pulled up. Jumbo here. Wow, that's deep.
Yes, I hear. I know. I see those. I see those too. And I'm just like, what is happening, right? Because this isn't about an empowerment. This isn't about like, oh, I'm taking back this term. It's like, did we even discuss the history of the term for you to feel that it's okay to have a line of sauces named this way? Like, if you ask people, to your point, when you highlighted that in that part of the book, Jared, it's like, how many people know of this, and how many of it's like a term? I don't know where the term is from. People just use it.
I mean, there's a recognition. Again, the version I got was just a reference to. I mean, I understood that it had something to do with the racial history and the hierarchy, because it was clearly described as something that you say or give a nickname to someone who is darker skinned. But this whole history that you're talking about, the specifics of the policy and the racial identity, the development of the mythology of the mestizaje, I can never say that word. Mestizaje, the fantasies imposed on the fantasies. I mean, it's like it's and then this whole point about Black people being not the other, permanently other, just an outside of humanity, citizenship, all of that. I mean, I'm like this.
Yeah, that is probably doesn't come up in the family combos. It's probably not. They're not talking about that because they're talking about, how there is just a kind of sweeping away. Like, let's just sweep away all of these other parts of it and just use it in a way that, like, we don't mean anything by it, but how can you not mean anything by it once you learn? and understand its history, right?
Well, part of it is also the flip
can't.
side is that they'll also say, but we call the white looking one gringo. Like they'll say we nickname
Well,
him
that is
gringo.
not, those terms are not the same. So whoever's telling you that these two, I'm just gonna let you can tell them that Kaysha told you that those terms are not the same. The racial violence that, is Shombo is very different. It's just, there's no comparison, right? You in fact have gringo being utilized sometimes to talk about Black people, because this idea of like, you come from the US or you come from anywhere else, you're an American. Whereas thinking about, Shombo as a term, it is one that was intensely used to specifically racialize and marginalize, would not be used to describe other populations, and was intended and has to be connected to that. I talk about, books that were being written, published by the government about the danger, right, of the antillano, of Black people taking over. It is part of that legacy, using that term, using that terminology.
That's my favorite uncle-in-law too. We need to talk, man. We gotta, I don't know, because, but part of it is also, honestly, it's like, I'm, there's, in terms of overtly political, I am, an oddity in that regard, when it comes to the family. And then, I think there's this a little bit of, there is this attitude, I think, of, I'm bringing in my biased, racialized attitudes from the United States, and trying to impose, because I'm like, I know what you're, sort of intrinsically, I understood what you're saying. It has to be right. I just didn't know the history and I didn't know the details, and it's not discussed. But I think I'm gonna. This won't rest with me, so I'm almost sure we're gonna have to have. Go ahead. So
that conversation, yes. And I always say that, when people make that claim, like, oh, you're just coming in with a U.S. perspective, racialized, etc., I remind them that these terms, the laws that were implemented, the U.S. didn't make Panama do this, right? This is Panamanian history. So you have to embrace the beautiful and the ugly in any national history. And that means reckoning with this. It doesn't mean that you are, dismissing the affiliation or connection that you might have, but it does mean being cognizant of the fact that you might inadvertently be reproducing some of the very racism and xenophobia that founded the nation without intending to. Because I don't think that is the intent of many people doing it, but they have not had an opportunity to sit down and be told, actually, this comes from this moment in time where you actually had this stripping of rights, where you had an attempt to have people coming together to forcibly deport, right, to forcibly remove people born in this country. If you know that it is connected to that, then I think you would be a lot more hesitant about using it, capitalizing on it. It would require a deep and comprehensive discussion of next steps. Some kind of reparative engagement would need to take place. And even then, I don't know if the term would ever be one that could be, embraced in any empowering way, precisely because it's so deeply rooted in violence.
Now I am offended at gringo. So when I, but I get your point. So when the last time we were in Darien and some young folks were asking me if, I know what I look like, but they were asking me, are you a gringo? And I was like, no. We got to have a conversation about what that means. I was like, I may carry a U.S. passport. I may be a citizen, but we need to have a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. I don't accept that. I don't accept that definition. I won't tolerate it. So to me, it's a complete insult. I was like, absolutely not. But but I get it anyway. All that aside, just a little bit of humor there, a little bit of fun there.
Sure.
Coco, thank you very much. Right on. And credit goes to our guest for that. I'm sure we did get a nice little roll call here. Professor Corinealdi.
There you
That I
go.
thought was pretty cool. I'm trying. I'm gonna keep working with it. I'll get there. In terms of folks from Panama that we may know of. So aside from these who Duran and Ruben Blades, who are not necessarily considered Afro-Panamanian, we get Jay Electronica. I thought I did know that. I did not know about DJ Clue. This is a surprise to me. I'm very interested to have learned that. Same thing here. I did not know Eric Dolphy is Panamanian.
Yeah,
Shout out to
Tahir is on
Jazz.
it. Tahir is on it. Yes.
Yeah, right on.
Yes.
Now I did know I'm the one that dropped. I don't have it highlighted here, but I did drop Billy Cobham in there as a wannabe drummer. He's one of my favorites, Panamanian, Brooklyn-based Panamanian of origin drummer, jazz drummer. El General.
Yes, of course.
What is there? A couple other ones. Ishmael Rivera. Yep. And I said Noriega, Nori, the legendary MC. Okay, couple more things here. If your time is still okay, there's a couple more. What is it? What do you think of China and Nicaragua doing the canal under the BRI would mean for Panama and U.S. hegemony in the area? And then there was another comment about the Chinese population in Panama, which is very interesting. So maybe you could, segue from one to the other, if that's all right. If you have a comment about the canal building.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first one. And then end with the canal building because the Chinese diaspora presence in Panama is one of the largest in Central America, and it is drawing from the railroad construction. So just as we know that for railroad construction in the U.S., there was a large group of Chinese workers who ended up doing that building. This was also the case in Panama, and so many after that some remained. Came forth later on, opening up shopkeepers, etc. This is something that we also see throughout the Caribbean, but in Panama, certainly a large population that later on emerges from having been part of that railroad construction to building schools, to creating a sort of thriving restaurant community, also in political power. So one of the already by the 1940s, there is someone who is of Chinese ancestry in government in Panama. So it's sort of a really rich diaspora therein. In terms of the canal building, that has been something that there have been murmurs around for such a long while in terms of that canal to Nicaragua and, who would finance it and what it would build, what it would mean. I think ecologically, it would be a disaster. I mean, already maintaining the current lock-based system it requires so much. I mean, this is also drinking water, right? That is being, you basically have to make concessions for drinking and potable water and maintaining the lock system. If you want to do another system like that, it would require so much at a time that we know the world is literally falling apart through global warming. So that would have to be a whole conversation. But in terms of just the financing and ability to do it, until I see any construction start to happen, it really feels like it's just discussion still, that there is not a full-fledged, okay, this is how it's going to be required, it's what's going to mean. And in terms of the industry, to be able to compete with the amount of ships that are able to go through the canal, which was expanded about 10 or 20 years ago, so that you could have the Panamax, the even bigger ships go through, to have something like that comparable in Nicaragua. Again, the ecological just devastation that would mean would be a whole different story. Hence why I think you're seeing, at least I'm a lot more aware of protests that are along the lines of these new canal construction projects, because it is untenable ecologically.
Right. Yeah. Now, is this reference? Is this to mean that he's Panamanian or was Panamanian? Rest in peace. Or was that brought up for another reason? I don't know. And hey, Big Teal, I don't speak the language well, but my accent is sharp. When I get it going, it's pretty sharp. It comes with high grades from the most. Tatiana Ali. Okay, right on, right on.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Al Unique says I'm wrong. I heard that wrong. Okay, my bad. I didn't know. Sorry about that. Apologies.
Yeah, I love the corrections. People are on it.
Yeah, and speaking of being on it, Emma looks like she did some research here. Let's see. Wait, let me get it in order. According to online, the name of talking about the origins of Panama is used of a political jurisdiction by the 1530s in Spanish, probably from an unknown Guarani
word. Yes,
word
Guarani,
traditionally said to mean place of many fish. Probably Senegambian origin, because West Africa was largely Muslim population. Oh, wow. Okay, right on. Thank you very much, Emma. Very interesting. Let's see what else is here. I think we got that one. What else is? Oh, skin bleaching. I don't recall seeing any in Panama.
Not really yet. I can't recall seeing advertisements or even products for skin bleaching going through the markets and stuff like that. No, there's definitely, as in all parts, right, of the diaspora, colorism related politics, hair texture related politics, all of those things that do play into perceptions of beauty, acceptability, who you see on, the national news. So all those things, I think, are not unique to Panama in that context, but there's always that discussion of like, who do you get as representative of the nation, let's say.
Right on. Let's see. Do you know Dr. Keto Swan? Yeah, Keto.
Yes,
holla at me, man. Keto, I'd love to host that.
Yes,
Where
yes.
you
So
been?
I
Where you at,
actually
Keto?
bumped into Keto in New Orleans. We were at the American Studies Association meeting this past weekend, and we were both like, "Yes, that's right." So I know Keto. He's really great in thinking about the diaspora, and now expanding to Oceania and thinking about different Pacific Black communities and discourses. So yeah, I would love to be in further exchange and conversation with Keto. He's definitely someone whose guy's work.
Yeah, no
I
doubt.
like.
I didn't know
That's
this.
good to know.
Yeah, I have to check this out. And in fact, you know what?
Yeah.
I've been a member of Quelly TV for a minute, and I don't use it enough, to be honest. I got it, but I support it. So I'll go find it. And maybe,
Yeah, no,
yeah, Coco,
definitely.
I'm hungry. Straight up. I'm getting something to eat as soon as we wrap. I'm about to dip. Yeah, as soon as we wrap, I'm going to get something to eat. So that's I'll invite others to if there are any other comments or questions, please drop them in there. Otherwise, I'll invite you to offer up any other thoughts or any other issues from your book that we didn't get to that you would at least want to draw our attention to. Oh yeah, Pop Smoke was Panamanian. I didn't know that. Okay.
No, I would say that for me, the book is also partly an homage to teachers. I think there's something to be said about the way that the teachers that I talk about in the book were really trying to get their students to be empowered and imagine themselves as having a future when those around them were telling them otherwise. So I think it's like the second chapter where I talk a bit more about some of those teachers. And so I would say, at a moment when we are having a lot of discussions nationally, but I think also internationally about, what we hope that happens in the classroom and the kind of access and power that we hope teachers can provide to our students, to also keep in mind that in the Panamanian context, they were having to do this while the children they were teaching were being told that they were stateless and that no nation would have them. And so to think about what that kind of focus on education can do when so many alternatives are being presented as impossible. So yeah, teachers are mentioned in bits and pieces, and education is mentioned, throughout. And I do want for people to see this both as my contribution to helping the sort of larger public education, but rooted in a long legacy of people who understood that knowledge is something so powerful that can't be taken away, even as other rights are constantly being challenged.
Thank you. We did get this question just came in. Do you have an opinion on the Panama Deception documentary?
Is that the one
about the invasion?
Is that about the invasion?
Yeah,
about the invasion. I feel like that's more has to be done to really map out everything that went down with the invasion, because one of the things that's touched upon is, the areas that were devastated through U.S. bombs, et cetera, were also very large Afro-descendant areas, right? And so the idea that these are the very communities that are the most devastated, that this was seen as the only source of action, that you were going to go in and destroy, as a child when that happened, that was my first experience hearing bombs, my first experience being worried about whether or not my mom was going to be stopped at a checkpoint and be able to see me, because he also then had U.S. soldiers who came and were essentially trying to find Noriega, also, destroying neighborhoods, community sense of safety. And so a lot more has to be done to investigate, why that was ever considered okay. And the diaspora in New York and in other spaces, they were among the only people who were really challenging what was taking place. So many were okay with this notion of, we've got to go in and destroy over drug charges. It's just that there's a lot more that the documentary begins to do, that other people writing about this begins to do, that I think needs to be further discussed, because the imbalance of just neighborhoods destroyed, neighborhoods that later on then are being replaced by commercial areas, it is all part of a larger nexus of capitalist, imperial, militarist exploitation altogether that needs to always be examined and just investigated.
Yeah, and to this comment here, as this is always the case, but there's also, and something I've been wanting, just one of the many projects I've never followed up on that I wanted to do, was that because there's even within my own in-laws, there are Black Panamanians who refused while serving in the U.S. military to participate. So I don't know how pervasive that was, but I need to know that I at least know of a handful. So I would like to maybe follow up on that story at one point, pull that thread and see what comes out. Because not everybody went.
That's right. And it does mean something, because if you think about already, with Grenada, and that invasion, right, and what it meant to be, a Black person, a brown person engaged in that, and you're killing people who are part of that larger African diaspora. You've got to wonder, and is this justified, right? It was condemned at least with Grenada, and there's a sense of, are we justifying continued and ongoing U.S. military operations that, only grow, right? Only continue to grow after these, invasions. And so, for a long time, any questioning of what was happening in that regard, people were shunned, blacklisted for making these kinds of commentaries, for just bringing up the questions. I mean, still there is hesitancy, right, to critique. I think often it's just a kind of matter of let's do it for the country. This is what we're being told is necessary. But with these invasions and the fact that so many, innocent people end up at the crosshairs, you sort of really have to wonder, who is this for, and what is the long-term goal of what's happening?
Right on. Well, listen, Professor Corinealdi, I really appreciate your work. I really appreciate you coming through this morning. I definitely look forward to building with you again in the future. And whoever catches up with Keto Swan first, tell him, holla at your boy, and let's set this up.
Yes.
Let's go. I know he's out. He stays in the wind. So but anyway, so just thank you again. The link to your website is in the show description already, so people should follow up, and you write there. Your book can be found there, and until we have you here next time,
right.
Like Fred Hampton said, we say peace to you, because we know you're out there fighting for keto outreach. We know it's QUITO, but we know what you meant. Somebody put the APB out on the Wandering African Scholar, hashtag Wandering African Scholar. Was. Anyway, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you. Take good care.
Thank you. You too.
All right, everybody. Look, I hope you appreciated that as much as I did. I hope you had some fun. I will definitely look to stay in touch. I have to continue to read the book and invite the sister back on, because that was great. There were just quickly just a couple of things that I wanted to just quickly get to. So let me just do a quick pause break, and then I'll just wrap up with a couple of things, and then we can get out of here. So don't go anywhere. Be right back. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. So first of all, I just wanted a couple things here. One, shout out to all the good people out here doing activist and organizational work, and in particular our reconstituting study circle in the AAPRP. We had a really good build yesterday, so shout out to that whole crew, and hopefully we can bring some more of that to this platform as well. Where we even were working from the Hood Communist summary or essay on Nkrumahism, Touaregism, and how are we going to update that? And I don't know to what extent the Hood Communist crew has dealt with that question, or anyone else, but so for instance, I raised the question, there's a section in that essay where Sekou Touré, I believe it was him, was talking about the dialectic of man and woman and what that means in an African context. And so I was, just honestly, I was just wondering where's the AAPRP on the shifting dialectic with both in terms of gender and sexual identity, but also for me, selfishly, in terms of racial identity, that just as there are being there are struggles around expanding gender and sexual identity and all of that. I feel like there is differently an attempt to negatively impose a similar recategorization racially, whereby those of us with varying parentages, so to speak, are being encouraged farther away from an African or Black identity or identification, being welcomed into. So I wasn't trying to say that, these are similar or the same, but just in terms of if there is just this binary being used in Nkrumah-Toreism, is that same binary being differently addressed or changed or assaulted even in terms of race, where that initial Black-white European African binary, at least in the United States, is being encouraged more to change. So anyway, it was a very interesting build, and I look more forward to that. Then as we've been discussing maybe more than any of us would want to, Kyrie Irving and Kanye West, I turn around and I go to one of my streaming platforms looking for something to distract myself, which of course is fool's gold. And what pops up, because of the coming Christmas season, an invitation to watch Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. And I don't mean to sound like some who are making similar points online for, I think, different political reasons, but I was sitting there thinking, how in the hell are we having to get all of this about Kanye and Kyrie when Mel Gibson not only has said worse, particularly about Black people? Do you all remember what he said? He hoped was on tape where he said what happened to his ex-wife, referred to Black men as a pack of ends. But the Passion of the Christ, what more anti-Jew messaging has ever been developed than that monstrosity of a film that I know, because Mel made it to the contradiction, or this contradiction. He can make a movie now. He can make a movie. So then I was even laughing, joking, because I said, even if you watch South Park, Cartman understood what the intent of that film was, as Cartman started to launch a new wave of Nazism in response to the encouragement of that film. So we know what it is. So we see how, look, so how is it that he gets not only to get away from all of the cancellation and the attack and the centering, but he gets replatformed anyway. Then I think it's been covered on this platform already. I think maybe Jackie and Professor Tawhid got to it, but I did just see this. I was asked about one of my favorite platforms. So just in case Wall Street on Parade yesterday or today, just very quickly, in case any of you weren't clear, anyone claiming that inflation is because all of us got too much money, or poor people this, or so what, so that. No, it's all because of corporate profit. And they went from making 11% corporate profits to 56%, I think is what this was, or 53%. So that's what it is. It's just more them ripping people off and then blaming us, and then saying anything that was given to people is the cause of it. So what else? Okay, so a couple things. So please stay tuned to the platform. Make sure you got everything done that you need to do to stay up on it. Yesterday, because I'll be traveling at the end of this month, I pre-recorded an episode that will air later this month with my man Marcel P. Black. That is dope. I can't wait for that. I feel like I should just post it now and find another thing to do later, but be patient. And then we're also going to have Dr. Kaysha Corinealdi is going to be back towards the end of the month to talk with us about the ongoing academic beef, history, and culture wars. So I look forward to that as well. There is something that I'm not finding in my notes that I know I wanted to bring up very quickly, but it doesn't look like that's gonna happen because I don't remember it and I don't see it. So anyway, that said, big shout out to Professor Corinealdi. Wow. Panama in Black. Please support the book. Please check it out. And thank you all for coming on and joining us this morning. And those who will see this later, please, keep it up. I just lost my train of thought. Thank you. So I'll just rest with this. Thank you, Big T.O. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. Thank you very much. No, but I do appreciate the support for this show, for this platform. And please continue it. Did you all see Sundays last night? Ear Doctor be killing it on these Sundays. That was a lot of fun. What else? There was something else. I was man, damn. Anyway, yeah, I mean, yeah, but but it just popped up. I was like, damn, it was like big. Like they was like, watch Passion of the Christ. I was like, damn, really? Thank you very much. Baba Balagoon coming up. We're gonna have him live and direct. When is that? When is that? Next week? Next Monday? Yep, the 14th. Live and direct, Baba Balagoon. I'm very much looking forward to that. I don't think you all realize how dope this brother is. Like, I think we he jokes around with us a little bit. We did the whole, Magoo Balagoon joint. We made jokes with the technology and the glasses and all that. We see him, and even then, and then we see him, doing the warrior class, and he starts, remind us that he could do some damage. But I don't think even beyond that, we realize how dope this guy is. Kalanji put me up on some of his books. I heard one of the audio, what do you call it? It's not a podcast, but it's like what am I trying to say? It's like an audio movie. You know what I'm trying to say? Like an audio movie, but that's not what it is. I mean, Baba Balagoon is so I titled that already accurately. He's an African Renaissance man. And so I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. Yeah, very much. And I don't think he's been interviewed. I think I win. I think I win. So, So years ago, I was in a meeting with what's the brother's name that runs allhiphop.com? We were in a meeting together with some mutual friends or comrades, and I think this was even at a time where he was talking about he wanted. I don't even remember. All I remember from that meeting is that I remember him saying he wanted to take all hip hop in a more organized journalistic direction. And I remember I offered to participate in that in some way. It never went anywhere. But at that meeting, someone had a camera and was saying, we're recording these living legends in tribute to Chuck D. So I've never even seen anything beyond that little clip. So I don't even know where it went, but a couple people reached out. I don't know if it showed up somewhere. Yeah. Audio drama, is that the word? Maybe that wasn't what I don't know. I thought I was thinking of something else, but that's what it is anyway. So yeah, I was in it. But I would like to see the whole thing. Is it a whole? I don't even know if it is it. I don't even know what the whole Living Legends thing ended up being. But yeah. Anyway, for sure. Audio. No, it's not an audio book. It's because it's like an old radio play, I guess. It's got the sound effects. It's got the multiple voice actors in it. It's Afrofuturistic sci-fi. I mean, it's dope. I mean, it's otherworldly, as they say, pun intended. Dang, what was that other thing that I wanted to say? There was something else, but I didn't. Anyway, so look, we'll just wrap for here and come up another time. Please do check out all the stuff. I dropped a number of things over the weekend, including a new black film pitch meeting, which I will have to do a critics response a response to critics. So folks, I don't know what the math is, but please, like at the point where you're willing to actually type a comment, wouldn't you have put in the minimal effort to at least read the show's description, which would help explain if you're not already clear? Like, I get that the pitch meeting, by the way, is a parody. I get that it's a ripoff of some, that's the whole point. Anyway, just having a little fun, but I'm just like, some people, I just don't think do you not get, is that a YouTube thing? We don't do nuance or irony. Thank you, James. Appreciate you. Especially since nobody's going to be able to wear a BPM shirt like you. I appreciate you. Anyway, so I'm like, man, that's funny, man. It's like, anyway. So, all right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you. Let me once again, and big shout out to my guest this morning in that work. I really, really had a good time. So please, whether you're critical or not, continue to share your thoughts and
put it in the comments.
And hopefully I'll get
message
so you can stop at
the fuck is he talking about
and saying
it's wrong, bro.
And the channel can get but it is for real with the comments. Y'all might need
I go in the comments for an assessment. I don't go in the comments because I need to go there for validation. It is always good for me to sort of understand what people are feeling or seeing from what I'm saying. And if there's something that I'm miscommunicating, then I want to make sure that I'm on top of it. But if there is a chord that I'm hitting, so be it.
Peace, everybody. Like Fred Hampton used to say, if you're willing to fight for it, as I know all of you are. So thanks again. Big shout out to all of you. Catch you next time here, and I mix what I like it throughout the platform. Thanks again, everybody. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.